As Josh, so today I've got a tactical discussion for you. And the topic for today's tactical discussion is the death of the false nine. But before we jump into the false nine, can you please tell me which team is thought to have first played with a false nine?
The first team I was aware of playing a false nine was Barcelona or Spain.
You're Yeah, it's not a bad shout because it's in modern history it probably is. But the first team to thought to have played with it is Corinthians back in the 1890s. So
The Brazilian flair there.
yeah, better Brazilian flair. They were the first team to play with essentially not a striker because obviously, as we understand, the false nine is a player who plays up top but doesn't play in the typical striker role. You know, he's not really trying to look to get him behind. He's also not really your main goal scoring threat. He's kind of almost an advanced playmaker, you'd really say. He's a guy who drops into that hole and allows your wingers to cut inside. But now, when I talk about the death of the false nine, we've obviously had Barcelona playing under Pep Guardiola, and even before then, Cruyff used to play with a false nine a lot of the time. Liverpool probably are one of the more successful teams in recent history with Jurgen Klopp and Roberto Firmino. And then since then, I mean, you could maybe say Diogo Jota's still a false nine, but Haaland has now come into Manchester City, and Pep Guardiola kind of leads the transitions of tactics at the moment in modern football, I would say. And most recently, in the international break, we saw Greece beat England, where England didn't have a recognised striker on the field, and they clearly attempted to play a sort of false nine or no recognised striker up top. And I just think we're getting to a point of your centre-backs are now so quick, they're so dynamic, that the idea of having a false nine to either draw the defenders out and then put your wingers in, or have them stand off so that your false nine can move forward, is kind of becoming a bit extinct because your centre-backs are too dynamic for it.
Are you saying that the false nine is becoming extinct because the centre-backs are just too quick?
Well, I think that's one of the reasons. I also think the wingers who are diving in, your Mo Salahs, those kind of wingers, Luis Suarez when he played out wide a couple of times, you're actually looking more at wingers now who seem to be looking to play back into their midfield rather than actually getting in behind the defence, especially when you look at your top teams.
Well, it's interesting with the false nine because two different ways I see you could play it. You've got that Spain national team way where they had six effectively centre midfielders in as a formation. It was Fabregas, Xavi, Iniesta, and then whoever else was there. And I'm not talking about that Villa Torres team. There was a team that they won their second Euro of that World Cup Euro, where they literally had six centre mids as the midfield six. And in that case, I don't think that's about getting in behind. I think that's almost disabling the fact that the other team could have a physical advantage, whether that's height or pace, because you just keep the ball and you keep playing it in between the opposition. And your plan defensively in the midfield, at least, is to crowd the midfield and do interceptions. And with you obviously having defenders who can win the aerial ball if the opposition decide to go long. So that's one way of playing the false nine. But the way that I think is actually easier and more common was how Liverpool did it with Firmino, where you have the two inside forwards getting in behind. To a degree, that's what Jesus also played with at Arsenal when he was initially the striker. And you could argue Kai Havertz, to a degree, maybe that was the idea behind him coming in. You have Martinelli and Saka getting behind. I disagree with you that because of having quick centre-backs, you can't play that system anymore. Part of, one element of getting in behind is pace, but the other element of it is good movement. Like if you can time your runs or just be clever about the way that you execute a run, you can still get in behind someone without having necessarily the pace in them. I do agree, clearly it makes it harder, but I think that's actually a more effective strategy, is having the false nine who drops into a midfield, drawing centre-backs out, and then having the runs in behind them. As not, then pace isn't as big of a factor as it normally would be in a normal traditional foot race.
I think the movement is a very important aspect of any attacking play. So I do agree with you on that. But I think that what we're seeing now with Virgil van Dijk, Mickey van der Ven, these kind of guys, when you compare it to 10, 15 years ago, it's your Carlos Puyols, your John Terrys were your best defensive players. to be fair, you can even look at William Saliba and Gabriel. Like those they would be considered very, very quick defenders 15 years ago. And I think the recovery pace, because the big thing you had when Barcelona was doing it and when they first started doing it, and also then under Pep Guardiola when they were doing it, is that your defenders were generally big, strong boys who were good in the air. That's what you looked for your central defenders, and they didn't really have the recovery pace.
The one thing I want to talk about with the false nine is I'm not entirely convinced that false nine is less popular now than it was 5-10 years ago, because I remember even when Barcelona and Spain were using the false nine, at the time it was like a big surprise. Oh, we don't see false nines very often. So the fact that Greece England use it now, and it's a huge surprise to me. It's that similar level of surprise or level of use. The false nine is getting the similar level of use now than it was 5-10 years ago, which is not often. I don't see it as something that died away. It's not something that was ever like mainstream, if you know what I mean.
I'm not sure I necessarily agree with you on that point, because I think we did have a period about 5-6 years where you got to think who were the top strikers in the world. Most of them were, you had Robert Lewandowski, your Karim Benzema, your Harry Kanes. But beyond that, I mean, you had a lot of... So Firmino was a false nine. Haaland, before Man City had Haaland, they always played with a false nine, And then even at Arsenal, when they lost Giroud, they didn't really play with a striker. I mean, I would never call... Even now with Jesus, they would probably call him more of a false nine than anything else. Newcastle currently have injury problems as well. I understand that, but they still, you wouldn't really want to have Anthony Gordon as a striker. You can tell it's a midfielder playing in a striker role. And Chelsea last season, where again a little bit down to injuries and Nicholas Jackson and that, but they played a lot of the time without an out and out striker. And then this season they've got Nicholas Jackson back. He's playing really well, and he's playing in a proper striker role. I wouldn't call him a false nine, because he gets in behind a lot more than you would see of a typical false nine. So I think we have shifted away from a lot of the top teams having false nines to the teams who now are playing with a false nine or not really playing with a striker up top, i.e. Man United, when they don't play with their striker up top and they get Bruno Fernandes in, they don't create the chances. And when they do create the chances, they don't have the players in the box to finish the chances.
I'm hearing your point there about when Man United switched to the system, for example, with Bruno Fernandes up there, they are so much less lethal. The chance creation drops off a cliff. So now I'm trying to think about it. Like, can you realistically play a false nine? It's always been... I can't think of a team playing a false nine successfully that was like a mid-table team. It's always been that you had like too many strong players in the midfield. You need to get them in. It's kind of actually, I'd argue, what England did against Greece. There are too many strong midfielders. How do you get them all in? Well, you just go with a false nine and you try and maintain possession and control the game. And that word control is why I don't think false nine will ever completely drop out of football. The top teams are always looking for how can we control a game. You're the better team. You don't get hit on counters and draw a game 1-1 against a Greece. I know they're lost. I'm just saying you don't want to draw to potentially lose the game. So you try and instill extra midfielders in the game and extra control on the ball. And that's why Barcelona and I believe Spain started with the false nine. They wanted to have more control over the game. We'll get an extra man in midfield and you have that control. And we know we'll score eventually. So for that reason, even with the increasing physicality of centre-backs and defenders in general in modern football, I still think false nine will always have its cycle of coming in and out of the game. I do agree with your point that it's related to how many top world-class strikers are in the system at that point. If you got a choice between a Harry Kane / Haaland or having Firmino and playing a false nine, you're going with Harry Kane, Haaland, like every time. It's just how it works. But I don't... That through the generations will change. Like some periods of football, there's going to be more top strikers than others. So that's going to dictate, I think, how relevant false nine is at the time rather than the defenders.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I think it's very generational and based on the players in the world around at the time. But there's been an interesting discussion to hear your side of it. And I would love to hear what you guys have to say about this. Do you think that the false nine is on the way out, under threat of extinction, or is it just cyclical and it will make its comeback at some point soon? But love to hear from you. Please leave a comment, leave a like, and until next time, this has been Football Unspoken. Cheers.